good morning, everybody. Welcome to Barnyards and Backyards Live. I'm glad to be here. I hope everybody else is too. I'm Jeff Edwards from the University of Wyoming Extension. I'm located in the Torrington area. My co-host is Jeremiah Vardaman. Hello, Jeremiah.
Good morning, April Fool's Day and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Jeremiah is located up in the Powell area, Park County, northern part of the state. And our guest today is Clark Young. And in order for me to get this correct, he's the district tree specialist for the Laramie County Conservation District and located in Cheyenne, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Excellent. Well, we are glad you're all here. But before we get started, just a couple of things to remind you. If you have questions for us and you're participating in the Zoom meeting, please use the chat feature, which if you take your mouse and scroll over the screen, the buttons will pop up at the bottom. Click the chat or the Q&A feature. Type in your question. We'll be watching those and we can bring them forward to Clark. If you're watching us on Facebook and you have a question, please use the comment section, ask your question. Jenny Thompson, who I did not introduce, and I apologize, Jenny, is our third member of our team. You may not see her, but you will probably hear her. She is monitoring Facebook and can bring those questions forward to us, and we'll get them asked of Clark or any one of us, actually. So I think we're ready to go. Jeremiah?
I think we're good.
All right, thumbs up.
I thought you were rusty, but you nailed it.
So Clark, very happy to have you with us today. And if you want to dive into your presentation, or if you'd like to talk a little bit more about yourself, whatever you'd like to do, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Just kind of want to start out, Clark Young with the Conservation District here in Laramie, or in Cheyenne. I'm a certified arborist, so I've got about 20 years experience in tree care. So I've been doing everything from planting to removing to pruning to everything. So here in the Conservation District, we do a lot of tree plantings and that. So that's kind of a little bit of background on me. I guess we can just start off with the slides if you want to.
Sure, go ahead and share.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Yes.
Everybody see everything?
Yep, you're up.
All righty. Kind of to start out with this, the picture here, this is in Lions Park here in Cheyenne. Everybody wants a big, beautiful tree like this. So in order to do that, there's a lot of care and love goes into taking care of these trees. So I just kind of touched today on a few of the general maintenance that you need to do for trees to get them up to this stage. There's a lot of stuff with early planting and that kind of stuff you need to go through to get them up to this stage in life. So this is a mature tree. This tree here, I think, is close to 80, 90 years old. So we'll just kind of dive into these. And if you got questions, anytime you want to.
So basically, Clark, proper tree care means that those trees are probably going to outlive us, correct?
Hopefully. There's some short-lived trees, but in general, some of these trees can last 80, 100, 120, 200 years old. So I mean, yeah, the whole idea is to get them to last as long as we can. So and here in Wyoming, trees struggle. So there's a lot of care that needs to go into them.
We already have a question in the comments section here,
Okay.
Clark, and we don't need to tackle it. It's maybe a little early, so if you want to hold off, no problem. But Sharon asks, thanks for doing this show. They have an apricot. They have apricots on their tree once in about 10 years, and they live near Lovell, Wyoming. I've always thought it was dependent upon the spring and winter weather. The tree has been leaking sap in some areas where the bark has split, so it's kind of sick already. Any suggestions?
We'll kind of go into a little bit of stuff, especially your smooth bark trees. Care for those. Where your bark split and stuff like that, it could be from frost. So like when we get in a little bit further in more conversation, what you need to do, getting those trees ready for winter. Because if you water too late into the year, water's still trying to transpire up that tree, and we get a cold snap come in, and that's usually when we see bark split. So we'll touch into that a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, let's move on then.
Okay. Okay, so here I recommend people going out into the field, 2 to 3 times a year. Early spring, you want to go out and just walk through your tree rows or walk through your trees in your yard. You want to look for general health, see if the trees are showing signs of wind damage, lack of water. Depending on the time of year, insects show up at different stages of that the growing season that year. So that's why I recommend going through several times. In springtime, you can notice usually that's damage that was done during the winter. But with the insects and that stuff, they can show up a little bit later. Signs of disease, and then like early spring, animal damage, especially like pine tree. Well, any tree basically that we've got a lot of deer, elk, antelope around, bunny rabbits that can do a lot of damage. And if you catch those early, sometimes you can correct the problem or help the tree along to survive it. So yeah, I always recommend, go through, take your time, just even when you're out watering your trees, it's a good time to just look the general health of that tree over.
And so with that, Clark, if I'm out there inspecting my trees, you're looking for off coloring, you're looking for damage to that tree, broken limbs, right? Or anything to the trunk, maybe like chew marks or rub marks or anything that way. Is there anything else we need to be paying attention to?
Early spring, there's a lot of funguses that could start a tree over winter, especially if you got big drifts around your trees. So you'll notice some, like on your needles, a little bit of discoloration. And it's very hard to tell the difference between a fungus and like just wind damage, because the needles are both going to turn brown over time. But early detection signs of like a fungus is your needles turn, especially on a spruce tree, something like that, junipers. You'll notice a kind of a purplish color first, and then red, and then brown. So it's a good idea. I mean, when you're seeing that, and if you're not sure what it is, there's a lot of resources to, and we'll kind of go at that at the end. Some of the resources of where you can find out what's going on with that tree.
Perfect.
Animal damage. Sometimes the animal damage is under the surface. There's a lot of moles, voles, ground squirrels, badgers, all kinds of stuff that can do a lot of damage to the roots of the trees. So you want to look at the ground also and look for mounds, that kind of stuff, holes, especially around in close to your trees, because once those varmints get down in there, they can do a lot of damage to the root system of that tree, and you could lose your whole tree. And those are a lot hard with damage like that. That's a lot harder to come back from as compared to like your beetles and that kind of stuff, or even funguses.
Yeah, I'm constantly on the lookout for gophers on my property and removing them from around my trees.
Yeah, and it's especially if there's big drifts, they'll live under those drifts throughout the winter. You'll see little mounds of dirt, trenches all over your property, and little holes. So I mean, around the trees, and that's where they kind of like, and they like some roots a lot better than they do others. They love apple trees. I've seen them totally girdle, almost take every root off of an apple tree that falls over, and it looks like a cigar butt. So, yes, it's and moles and voles and that kind of stuff. That they're a little harder to get rid of. There are ways of doing it. Even if you're doing some of the poisons and that stuff, for those, you want to walk your property. You follow the instructions on the whatever you're putting in, but you need to be vigilant. Walk your property, because you don't want those critters getting above ground and then your pet getting a hold of them, or a bird getting a hold of them and or spreading that chemical or that to the whatever you have.
Right.
So this next one, probably the biggest thing that I notice when I go out, I do a lot of tree calls in the summertime. People call me to come in and look at their tree for it's not doing well. So I'll go out and look at them. Probably the most, my opinion, the most important step to maintenance is water. Here in Wyoming, we don't get a lot of moisture, and what little bit we get usually isn't enough for the trees. So that, to me, good tree health, water is probably the main thing. There's a lot of ways of doing it. Knowing how much your tree needs. Kind of the general thought is, at chest high, whatever the diameter of that trunk is, it's 10 gallons per inch. So you get some of these big trees, they could suck up a lot of water. With that, you want to supplement water. I mean, you have to here in Wyoming. A lot of people think, the tree's big, mature, it's getting what it needs. It just, our soils and everything here, it just, that water never gets down to those roots that need to suck it in order to survive. So, as far as watering,
with that, Clark, I guess at least what I hear a lot of times from clientele and that they have a misperception that tree roots go really deep in the ground because of how big the tree is, and that they're tapping into water underground, and not necessarily need that surface water and irrigation from that. And maybe you can talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of times, I'll pull up to a site and their lawn's nice and green, but yet their tree's suffering. Everybody thinks, well, my lawn's green, everything in there is getting enough water. And well, turf requires a lot less water than the trees do. And in order for like a taproot to get down to what our water source, like an aquifer or something like that, where the water is, it'd have to go, sometimes 200-300 feet in the ground, and roots just don't go that deep. So,
well, and that those two are competing for water, right? Your lawn is competing for water, and the tree's competing, and the lawn's going to get the water first because those roots are higher up in the soil profile usually.
Yep.
So they're in constant competition there. Yeah, and like right now, I would imagine for the entire state of Wyoming, but up here in the Bighorn Basin, we had a very mild, dry, windy winter. And so our trees are really behind in water, and all of our plants, perennial plants. But man, right now with the good weather, be watering trees right now is what I'm telling people.
Yeah, that's one thing we tell everybody also. It's just, what were you saying with the wind? What little bit of moisture we have had so far, that constant wind on it just dries everything out so fast that the moisture never gets in there to do what it needs to do.
Sure. We got some clarification questions coming in, Clark, and these are really, really good questions. Off of Facebook, Mark asked, how often should that watering be of 10 gallons of water per inch of diameter? How often should that watering be? Are we talking once a day, once a week, once a year? Can you give us some guidelines?
Okay. For the watering on we recommend once a week in the summertime, spring and summer, and then going in the fall. You want to make your deciduous trees, you want your deciduous trees, which are trees with leaves, to harden off for winter. So you don't want to water too late and we'll kind of go into that again with some more of the maintenance part of it. But you want to evergreens don't go dormant. So I mean, winter watering is highly important for those. Good days, we recommend 40 degrees or above, not windy, which we don't have very many days like that. Once a month on evergreens throughout the winter. You can water deciduous once they go dormant once a month, just to keep that soil. It will still, as long as we don't have frost, I mean, that'll still get down into that soil and into those roots. So kind of clarify that, once a week in the summertime, pretty much on everything, and then once a month throughout the winter.
Perfect. So another question is, should that watering be done at the trunk or out from it? I have heard that you should water further away from the tree to promote root growth, to get them to grow further out. What guidance do we have there?
And there's kind of two different thoughts of that. Originally, it was right at the trunk, and then it kind of moved out. Throughout the years, they're saying usually halfway between the drip edge, which is the outside limb, and the trunk, and then right out at the drip edge. It's kind of actually moved a little bit more back towards the trunk of the tree. But what you want to do there is maybe spread. We definitely recommend spreading it around. Tree wells work the best, building your little well out to that drip edge, because then that water will spread out. A lot, you get in these big trees, you can't do that.
So Clark, not to interrupt you, but as we have people influx into Wyoming, which seems to be happening a lot, and they come from places where it's really easy to grow trees. They might not understand what you're meaning by making a well, right?
Okay.
Because in a lot of places where it rains a lot, you try to shed off as much water as possible.
Right.
So if you can talk about that a little bit more, I think there might be some folks who appreciate that.
Okay. With a tree well is after you plant your tree, you have the excess dirt. So what I recommend, and we'll go a little bit in the planting a little bit later. But what you do there is plant your tree at the proper height, and then excess dirt, or even if you have to bring in dirt, to put you a little berm, basically all the way around out of your drip edge or wherever your hole was. A couple inches deep, if you can. That will help hold the water in. And then plus, if you're mulching, which is we recommend you do, it'll help hold that mulch in place. If you just plant a tree level and don't have that berm, water tends to run off, and then your chips blow away. So it doesn't really help a lot. Slow. And when you another thing is with watering, you want to water slow. Drip systems work the best with a bubbler. That way you know exactly what you're putting on that tree. And then if you do water out of a garden hose, quarter turn, let it go in slow to where that water's actually seeping into the ground rather than just running off.
I've heard that the flow should be equivalent to the diameter of a pencil or less.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. Yep.
Because I know that there are some hydrants on homes now, a quarter of a turn is full blast.
Right, right.
Depends on your pump, right?
Yeah.
Right. And one of the ways I tell people, how much to put on for an idea how long they need to let it run is, get that flow, about a quarter turn or size of a pencil. See how long, fill up a 5-gallon bucket, and however long that takes to fill up that 5-gallon bucket, multiply that whatever you need to put on for that tree. So that's kind of a good idea. Some people would just go out there and put a hose out there and just let it run all day.
Yeah.
And that's not really
a good way to figure out how much you need or how much time.
Yeah. You know, slow drip's the best method. I mean, you could say that like with windbreaks, you can even set up timers to where it's all automated. That's a good way to go. That way, especially if you're gone and stuff and people's getting, you can get the water on the trees that you need to. We kind of recommend doing above ground systems here in Laramie County, just because for those evergreens, you know, because a lot of the above ground systems, you can water your trees in the winter time without have to go in and blow out those irrigation lines each time.
And monitor them for damage.
Exactly. Yeah. Underground's a little hard to tell until you see a big old wet spot or a hole.
So
Was
what's
there any
next after watering then, Clark?
Okay. Kind of what we were talking earlier. Competition. So anything that's growing in and around that tree is competing for what the water, nutrients, everything that tree's getting. So we recommend, you know, going in and removing sod if it's growing right up to the trunk of the tree. You could either do that by digging it out. You want to be real careful with that though, because if you don't want to damage any roots. You will, I mean, you'll damage some little feeder roots that'll be around on top, but usually that's fine. So don't go digging down, you know, 6 inches, but just try to remove the sod portion of that. That will kind of even help create that ring that we were talking about earlier. You know, there's a lot of people that ask me, well, is it okay to plant in that area where you remove that, the sod, you know, put flowers, that kind of stuff. Again, anything you put around that trunk of that tree is going to compete. So you want to eliminate the competition. And by planting flowers, you're just creating it. So again, dig that, remove your sod. And then we recommend, you know, wood mulch. Wood mulch does a lot of things for a tree. It will, you know, preserve the moisture, help slow down the weeds. Sometimes you'll get weeds growing through them, and a lot of times you can just pull them out. That's probably the best way to do it. And keeps that soil cool, which is good for root growth. And then I think I already mentioned maybe preserves moisture for it. So we recommend, you know, if you can, a 4-inch ring all the way around. You don't want to go right up to the tree trunk. When you put that in, you want to leave a little air gap between that, because you don't want that mulch as it decomposing right up on that trunk. And another thing is a lot of people will put too much mulch. Basically, they call it volcano mulch, and it actually looks like a volcano heap all the way around that tree. Again, you want that trunk to have air, and you don't want that decomposed element there around your trunk of your tree, because you can get all kinds of issues with that.
Yep, and so I've seen that too, and volcano mulch or whatever we call it. But I actually saw it with rock. It was not wood mulch, and that's even worse. But you don't want that to go up and height up the trunk of that tree. Exactly. That is detrimental to it. We have a quick question on Zoom here. Will a dog urinating on trees kill the tree?
It can. I mean, it's not a good thing, because again, you're adding a different, whatever the word would be to the soils there, because it's going to run down that trunk. It's going to be absorbed by the soil, and that tree protection is big thing. I'm really for tree protections. From all types of animals, but definitely dogs using the restroom around the trees, not a good idea.
So get you a fire plug and put it in your yard.
Yeah, exactly.
And put a fence around the tree.
Our next question, Clark, is from Lydia. Is rock, small rock, like 2 to 3 inch size, spread around the base of a tree good or a bad thing, trying to keep down the weeds?
I don't really like rock for several reasons. A lot of times what they do when they put rock in, they'll put that fabric down first. And depending on what kind of fabric you put in there, water can't go through that fabric in a lot of cases. And then also, depending on what color the rock is, rock heats up. And so you don't want heat around that trunk of the tree. That's why I always recommend wood mulch, wood chips, because again, that it's keeping the ground cool. It's doing everything it needs to. And actually, as those chips decompose, I mean, you're actually adding good nutrients in the soil. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of the rock.
A lot of people do it. It's a big thing that
Exactly.
people do landscaping wise. It looks attractive. It's nice. It's, you know, not as messy, I guess, like the wind
Right.
can move those wood chips and things like that. But yeah, it heats up that soil surface, right? Especially in the peak of our summer, right? July, August, in the dog days of summer. And it's going to be drying out those trees further. And so thus you're going to have to irrigate more to try and compensate for that as well. But yeah, at least to my understanding, Clark, and I think you confirmed it, is just a wood-based mulch is better for the tree health all the way around in terms of keeping it cooler, keeping more moisture there, and then as it degrades, providing that nutrient base.
Right, exactly. And there's certain, I mean, there's just a regular wood chip mulch, but they're actually a product out there now. It's called Gorilla Hair Mulch. It's shredded cedar, and it's excellent as far as like wind. Once you put it down and you kind of tamp it down a little bit, it tends to stay in place a little bit better than the wood chips, just regular wood chips. So that's good.
So I'm just trying to be funny. So it just blows away as one big tumbleweed instead of it one piece at a time, right?
Yeah, it's yeah, just lifts right out of the ground. Yeah.
Sorry, forgive me. Please move on.
Oh, you're good. It does. I mean, that's another thing why that going back to kind of what we were talking earlier about the ring, because here in Wyoming the winds will blow that mulch off. So if you have some kind of a barrier there to kind of help keep it in place, it's really important.
So a follow-up question to the rock. Lydia asked, how can the rock heat up when they are covered by the shade of the tree? I am asking because somebody already did this to my yard. The rocks are already down with the cloth. And so good follow-up question, Lydia.
Yeah. Like a lot of them do it. And rocks good. I just don't recommend it for trees. What I recommend people that's got rock in there around their trees is, especially if it's a large area and they have plants planted inside that rock area, it just excuse me, pull that rock back, out a ways from your trunk, and remove the fabric, and you just put wood chips in that area, and then the rock will actually help hold those wood chips in.
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, it really depends on the size of the tree that you're talking about. But early morning, afternoon, there's always going to be some sun that gets under there, and that direct sunlight on that rock's going to heat it up. And the big part of it is it doesn't matter if you're talking pavement or stone or anything that way, or rocks, they're going to heat up and they conduct heat. They radiate that heat out over a long period of time. And so even though the shade will probably protect it through the mid part of the day, there's still going to be time periods where it's going to heat up from the sun. Depends on the slope aspect of that tree and the surrounding area, things like that. So it can heat up. Yep. Good follow-up.
Yes, but
we have another. Oh, sorry, Jeff.
I'm sorry. I have a question. So Clark, when the conservation districts are still planting tree rows, right? When that happens, do you still use the heavy duty weed fiber plastic to try to keep the weeds out, or okay. And is the recommendation after those trees get so large to try to go in and remove it because it can constrict the growth of the tree or injure them later on, or what's your recommendation on that?
Okay, for like the fabric we install, it's supposed to break down within 5 years. We use a pretty good fabric. It doesn't do that.
Right.
Especially as the trees get bigger and get shaded out, and then it doesn't get a chance to start decom or coming apart. So what we definitely recommend, people that's got tree rows, the trees are starting to get, about 7 years in, they're starting to get some good growth on them. Go in there and so when we install them, we cut about a 6-inch square X in the fabric. As those trees get bigger, they can actually squeeze that tree, basically girdle that tree and cut down the growth of it. So we recommend people going in there and enlarging those slits. I usually tell them go a foot out to where you only have to do it once rather than gradually each year or every few years. As far as like removing the whole fabric, I've had people that I've talked to that went in and tried to do it. It's pretty hard to do.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing.
And it's doing its purpose. It's keeping the weeds down in between the trees, and that's still. So we definitely recommend just going in and enlarging them slits a little bit, in order to let that tree, expand, grow. It's hard to do on junipers, because junipers are branched right on the ground. One way we recommend people to do that is get a person and then 2 buddies, put a 2x4 underneath that juniper, lift it up, and then let the other guy go in and make the cuts. Because it is kind of hard to get in on those junipers.
They're kind of
that's why it's important. Go ahead.
They're not easy to work with.
You're right. And that's why it's important to do it, early on. You might get a little bit more grass growing up in there, but the tree's already established and doing hopefully well.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be competing as bad.
That just seems to be something that I come across in Goshen County in more mature tree rows they looked really good for a while, and then they just didn't. They weren't growing like they should, and it seemed that the plastic was or the weed barrier was actually girdling the trees.
Yeah, that's a definite point. Another thing is our recommendations when we put them in, spacing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people put trees in closer than what we recommend in the intention of removing every other one further down the line.
But nobody does that.
Nobody does it. So all their trees are same height. They're not growing very much. And we'll get called out there and it's like, well, you need to go in. And I hate cutting down a live tree too, but those other trees will do a lot better if you do that. Junipers and that kind of stuff, they can grow close together. But like your pines and that, you want room.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I derailed the conversation, Jeremiah. Go ahead.
I'm getting us back on track, buddy. So we got a question. There was a situation where someone put mulch around a tree and it didn't do well, and they changed it to rock and the tree seems to thrive. What do you think happened there? And an underlayment was not used in either case.
Huh? That I have no idea.
Yeah, that's hard to know unless you know more detail about it. But my speculation is there has to be a management change of some sort.
Right.
So
maybe they started watering the tree better or whatever. And yeah, it's usually I hear the opposite on that.
Yeah, they could have been overwatering that tree.
Right.
Right. And putting the rock in there allowed it to drain better. It depends on where it was located. Maybe it was on the north side of a house where it was shaded. And so that's hard to speculate on why that was. Another question that we had, Susan off of Facebook asked, I've heard of and tried companion planting under a tree called fruit tree guilds. Any thoughts or information on tree guilds?
And I see them around every so often. Again, it's kind of like you don't want the competition for anything. So I don't know a lot about the subject, but I have heard of people using it.
Yeah, it's a big thing coming around from what I've seen, and there's another concept going around that fits with that fruit tree guild is food forests, right? So having the tree and then planting vegetables or other food crops underneath of those trees and that. And so in my perspective, there's nothing wrong with it if that's what your perspective and what you want to do. If you're going to do like the fruit tree guild, you want to make sure you're very precise in what you select and plant under that tree.
Exactly.
So it's beneficial to the tree. So a lot of them are like legumes or nitrogen fixing plants. So it kind of feeds that tree. The biggest challenge that I have seen with the fruit tree guilds or that companion planting is it's never, how to say that, it never stays the same. It never stays the way we want. And so some plants fall out and it gets dominated by other plants underneath those trees. And it's really hard to balance and manage that. The other concept that I see, and very much getting to your points, Clark, of competition, is anytime that we plant plants within those spaces, it's not that they can't live together. It's not that they can't do well, but it's hard to maximize everybody's health and growth under those situations because there is competition holding each plant down. Very much like what you said about removing the lawn, right? There's lots of places that lawns are underneath trees and they're both growing, but to maintain both for health and vigor is rather challenging. And that's usually where the recommendation is to select one over the other. Right.
And that plant that you put in is going to be requiring a lot less water than that tree is. So if you're putting enough water onto the tree, what it needs, it's kind of hard to get those two to balance out. So yeah, it's at least in my opinion, it's like it's best not to do it. And then I just want to touch base a little bit on another thing, a good idea why to remove that turf from the tree is we call it weed eater blight. That's probably one of the biggest killer to trees around that I've seen is people weed eating right up at that trunk, damaging that trunk. So that's why getting that solid away from there, that's another good positive for removing grass growing around your trees.
Yep, weed eater blight or lawnmower blight, where we're just physically damaging and girdling the trunk of that tree, right? Another question we had from Jessica off of Facebook is, at what point is it the tree's age or size do you stop extending the tree ring? And I'm guessing the well that you were talking about.
Right.
If I'm wrong in that, Jessica, please correct us.
I mean, ideally, you could mulch that entire area, but you get big trees, that's hard. That's hard to maintain. It's hard to keep up. The good part about having that ring out there, then you're not having to go in there, fight branches to mow what grass is there. We were mulching cottonwood trees that had a trunk of 20, some of them as high as 30-inch trunk. We were mulching out at least 2 foot all the way around the trunk, just to eliminate mowers and that stuff from hitting them.
That's pretty big.
If you can mulch all the way out, it's fantastic. You're going to be adding a lot more nutrients to the soil, and you're eliminating having to water turf and that tree. So you're kind of doing 2 goods with 1 shot there.
Awesome. Our next question is off of Zoom. I also have questions about buying trees, specifically pine trees. How can you tell if they've just been dug up and stuck in a pot versus being grown in a pot? The ones that have been dug up and put in the pot generally do not survive in my experience. I want to buy some pine trees, but also want them to survive.
we're kind of going. I touched a little bit on planting a little bit further in the slides. You'll know as soon as you pull out of that pot if it's one that's just been dug up. Main thing to do, I mean, we planted a lot of potted trees and they all did well, but the reason for that is we did what we needed to to the root ball of that tree when we pulled it out. A lot of people will just, pull it right out of that black container, dig a hole, plop it in the ground and throw dirt on it. And there's a lot you need to do before in order to make that work. Ball and burlap trees work good, for that, because you just want to keep that ball intact. But again, we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit on a couple more slides here.
Well, let's move on and maybe try and get there, and we can
Okay.
try and address that question as we're going.
Well, right here. So new trees. And I should have added a few more things to this. We can kind of touch base on it right now as far as like what we're talking about with trees. When you're out picking your trees, you want to, find the trees that don't have damages in the trunk. That's a big one. Or big clumps down right at the base of the tree. When you plant that tree, if it's a ball and burlap tree, you always want to cut away the burlap from that tree first, and then pull that back. And what you want to do is come down that trunk of the tree, and then right towards the bottom, that trunk will start to flare. That's where you want to have your tree at least ground level. That flare at least ground level. If we're mulching it, I always would go at least 1 inch to 2 inches high. So have that flare 1 inch to 2 inches high. Because if you just pull that tree out, take the ball and burlap off of it and plant it, a lot of things, some of these ball and burlap trees, we were removing 6 inches of soil to just get down to that root flare. If you go that deep, roots, especially when they're starting in that, need oxygen. And if you're going that deep right off the bat, the tree don't survive or really struggles. If you're doing containerized trees, you want to pull that ball out of the container. And one of the things that we would do is it's called box cut, which sounded, when we do it, people look at you like you're crazy. But we would actually take a saw and saw from the top to the bottom on all 4 sides, removing that girdling roots. That when you pull out a container, you see all those roots wrapped around each other. You want to remedy that problem so you don't have issues down the line. So the box cutting usually cuts those girdling roots to where you don't have to worry about it. And actually, when you cut a root, it actually promotes new roots to grow off of that cut. So we would do all 4 sides, and then we'd actually scribe the bottom a few times, just to make sure everything's cut. If it's right inside that ball, it's hard to see right off the bat. But by cutting those roots, you'll eliminate a lot of problems down the line. Your newly planted trees, and they kind of about the question earlier, either one should do well. One that's been freshly dug, you'll know right away on a ball and burlap tree if that ball is really hard, that's been sitting for quite a while. A lot of times in nurseries, they'll sweat them in, basically what they say. They go out and put them in rows, and then they'll put wood chips around them to keep that ball moist. Containerized trees are real hard to water. And you let that water penetrate down to all those roots. And then once you plant the tree, you want to properly stake it here, especially in Wyoming with our winds. Because if you don't, a lot of times those trees will just blow over. You want to keep that tree as straight as you can until it gets established and growing. We did 2 steps, either 2 stake or 3 stake. If it's a super windy area, use the 3 stakes just to keep that tree as level as you can, and then mulch after you get it planted, the right depth. The mulch can be up above that tree flare a little bit, just make sure you're not right up next to the trunk of the tree, and then water as it's needed.
Yeah, and as you were talking, Clark, I guess to answer that question previously is the best way to tell if a tree is freshly dug or been in a pot a long time. You can't tell if it's been grown in a pot necessarily, but
Right.
it's just those girdling roots. When you pop
Uh-huh.
that casing open and see how extensive those roots are, if they've been in a pot for a long period of time, those roots can circle the bottom of that pot or container one or multiple times around. And the
Right.
longer those roots are and the more in a circle they are, the longer it's been in a pot. And so in terms of knowing if it's been freshly dug and put in a pot, you won't see as much or any of those
Right.
types of habits. So we had a quick question as you were talking from Mike. How long should the tree be staked?
We always recommend at least probably 2 years. What you want to do at that 2-year mark, go out there, loosen your straps, grab your trunk of your tree, wiggle it. It will wiggle some. A little bit of movement's great. But if it's moving too much, you might want to leave it staked another year or so. And if after like 3-4 years, you go, excuse me, you go out there and it's still wiggling, you've got some root issues going on. It just hasn't rooted in yet. But most generally 2 years is good. You want to make sure that when you stake your trees, you don't want to have those straps tight, because you want the tree to move a little bit, because that tree moving is telling the roots, hey, I need to put something on here to anchor me. So you don't want them fiddle string tight, but a little gap in them is good, because you want that, like I say, that tree to move some.
Awesome. Well, what's next then, Clark?
Okay. So I'll kind of go into pruning. I mean, I could spend a day talking about pruning. When you're going out and doing your inspections in the spring, if you got busted limbs, that kind of stuff, that's the time you want to get rid of those. You don't want them to let them go all year. With your deciduous trees, it's best. It's all about timing on pruning. Deciduous trees, you want to wait till they become dormant, which is once they've lost their leaves. And then on conifer trees, your evergreens, that stuff, we always recommend doing them early or late fall, early winter. You don't want to be making fresh cuts on an evergreen in the summertime when you got a chance of beetle activity, because those fresh cuts, it puts out like a pheromone. And if there is any beetle activity in there, it draws them to them like you would believe. Dead and broken branches, you can remove those anytime. The big thing with that, you want to try to make the cut the proper cut. If it snaps right off of the trunk, that's a hard one to address, because it's already got a big wound in there. You don't want to make that wound any bigger than it has to be. So sometimes you'll leave a little tab just to not cut into that trunk any more than it needs to. On the amount you should remove each time, no more than a third of the canopy. And that's the whole canopy of the tree. So I put on a structure pruning, excuse me, structure pruning class a couple times a year, a plant and cut class a couple times a year. Some of the things we go over with structure pruning, I always look at developing an essential lead, especially young trees. This is, developing that central leader early on solves you a lot of problems down the road. You can address central leaders, which are more than one leader coming off that top part of that tree. Usually, if you have split leaders at the top like that, usually it's a bad attachment point, so you want to get rid of that, get that fixed early on. And then crossing branches, I'll look at that you don't want branches rubbing up against each other because you're creating a wound on both limbs then. And then lower branches that you're planning on having to remove for various reasons, like you want to get around there with mowers, or it's just going to be too close to the ground.
Sure. No, it's a lot, and there's pruning techniques for the various types of trees, right? Fruit trees are a little bit different,
Yep.
and shrubs are a little bit different, and small trees and that. But this is the basics to start with and to look into, and there's lots of other resources out there specifically on
Yes.
pruning. You can contact your local extension office or your local conservation district office, and they should help guide you to those resources as well. What's
Yeah.
next, Clark?
So tree protection, we definitely recommend that on, our plantings, mainly our pines, because bunny rabbits seem to love our seedling trees. So they'll do a lot of damage. They'll take the whole tree out. There's basically two kinds. There's a lot of different ways people try to protect their trees from animal damage, especially. There's a small cage you can put around small trees, junipers, your pines, your shrubs, that kind of keep those, like bunny rabbits, that kind of stuff, out of them. Or there's the larger ones that you have to put around, that's got in areas where you got a lot of deer, antelope, elk, because they love rubbing those horns on those branches, tearing them up, and they can go in and demolish a tree in a year, first go around. So if you are seeing damage, young trees, always, if it's in your yard, you don't really need the cage, something like that. This is more out in your open areas and stuff like that. People, talked about several different ways. There's some sprays and stuff like that they use to try to keep deer away from them. Cages seem to work the best. Even though those cages, the deer will still destroy those cages, even trying to get to that tree.
Yep. We have some questions. I think it's in your next slide or two, but there were some questions getting back to the start of our conversations with that bark splitting. And so let's see. Off of Facebook, Deb asked, I have a young red, and she thinks it's a maple that is bleeding due to splits in the bark. I've noticed it on the warm day, and we have wrapped the trunk, but the splits are on branches as small as 1 inch or 2 inch in diameter. Any thoughts?
So probably it's from frost. Those cracks are probably from frost. So again, that's kind of going back into the part about, hardening those trees off for winter. And it's kind of hard. I mean, sometimes we have a fall that's gorgeous, so we can water a little bit later into the fall. I always tell people, it's better to have them hard, go out and hit them once every 2 weeks, as opposed to, I always recommend in the fall time, in the August, come back to once every 2 weeks, kind of get them started going into the dormant stage, and then kind of cutting it off to nothing towards, September. As far as
what that does is pulls that tree back in terms of nutrients. There's
right,
not an
exactly.
abundance of water. It's not pushing nutrients to the tree. It's not pushing the tree's growth. And so it's starting to dry down kind of in a natural cycle. And that tree starts getting ready for the winter because of the restriction of moisture and of nutrients. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And then as far as like the lady wrapping those wounds, I wouldn't recommend wrapping them. Trees have a lot of properties in them, to try to heal wounds up. And everything people always ask me is, should I treat after I make a cut on a tree? That's kind of old thinking there. As far as like, they used to spray it almost looked like a black tar on wounds when they cut them in that. You want that, especially that kind of goes back to the earlier slide too, about making that proper cut. You don't want to damage branch collar there, because there's properties in that to heal that wound up. I mean, sometimes that wound can heal up completely, and you never even know there was a branch that you removed there. With splits and that kind of stuff, that those splits will try to heal themselves. Depending on what's already in there in that wound, by wrapping them, you could trap stuff inside of there, where it can't just naturally kick out. So I don't recommend wrapping wounds.
Well, and one of the biggest issues that I've heard, like what you were talking about before, I think it came from like the 40s and 50s, maybe the 60s, with treating wounds, like especially on prunings when you're doing cuts and that, but any damage to trees, they used to paint or smear a type of coating on it. And what they've found with recent research is that it trapped moisture in there, and that's almost more damaging to the tree than the coating itself. And same with wrapping, especially moisture. If any moisture is trapped in there, then we're starting to rot, develop fungus, disease issues within that tree. If that branch splitting down the road, that becomes a dead branch, that's your pruning and structural trimming in the spring or in the fall, depending on what tree species it is.
Exactly. Yep.
But there really isn't a good answer for trees that are oozing, right? There's not a fix.
No.
Yeah, you just have to kind of deal with it and accept that that's what's happening.
Well, and depending on what that oozing is,
right. I mean, it could be
sap, or is it a disease that's oozing from
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the one thing you probably should find out, is what specifically
what's going on.
Oozing. Yep. But again, the answer is not always that good. If it's oozing something that is not sap, we're at a fungus and a disease.
If it's a disease, Jeremiah, you're worse off than what you thought you were.
Right, exactly. So not good news when we're dripping and oozing. What else, Clark?
Okay, let's go to another tree protection, tree wrap. We kind of just recommend those on your smooth bark trees. Some of your fruit trees, Canada Reds, cherry, are known for a lot of issues throughout the winter. That's one of the reasons for wrapping trees. There's several different types. There's burlap, your durable, non-absorbent paper construction, and then your plastic tree. It's more like a guard, and the plastic ones can actually help if you got rabbits eating on your trunks, and that they kind of that helps protect it a little bit. If it's the paper type or the burlap type, they can still get to the trunk. But the main reason for wrapping trees, like your smooth bark trees in the wintertime, is we get an issue called sun scald. So what will happen there is you'll have a snowdrift, had a nice day in the wintertime, and the sun's reflecting off that snow right onto that trunk of that tree. So you'll get big wounds in your tree, and what it's doing, it's basically cooking the bark. So that's why you want to wrap them. You always want to remove that wrap in the spring, especially the paper ones, because again, like you were saying earlier, you don't want that moisture on that trunk, because you can get issues with funguses and that kind of stuff in there. Even the plastic ones you want to remove in the summertime, because I've seen people put those on. It just kind of wraps around the trunk of the tree. I've seen people leave those on for years, and that actually girdle the tree, because they don't give a lot. You'd think they would, but as they kind of come together, they'll cinch down. With the paper construction or the burlap, you want to keep that as tight as you can on that tree as you're wrapping it, because our winds, will blow that, and then you'll get a gap in that wrap, and again, you can get a damage to that trunk. So what we do, start at the bottom, wrap up tight, wrap that about a ½ inch, ¾ of an inch each time, and then put tape on the top and bottom just to keep that wrap in place. But by doing that, you'll notice a lot less damage to your smooth bark trees in the wintertime.
But we're putting that on in the fall and then
Exactly.
taking it off in the spring is what you
In the
said,
spring.
correct?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm saving one question for you. So I just want to see what your next slide is before I derail the conversation. I don't want to pull a Jeff out here.
Oh, come on.
I'm going to the resource pages. So, I mean, like, you want me to go ahead through this one first or do the question?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and do that. And then we'll just kind of open it up for Q&A. And if there's no questions, we'll just close the show.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of different resources out there. When you're out walking your trees, you see something you're not sure of. Yeah, again, you can contact your local conservation district, your extension offices. U.S. Forest Service has a lot of, it's more on your pines and that kind of stuff, but they're a real good resource to see kind of what's in your area. If your community has an urban forestry division, you know, they know what's going on in there as far as tree issues, what's going on, what pests are around, what funguses are around. So those are all good resources to trying to find out what's going on with your trees. And that's kind of all I have.
Oh, we got more for you.
We got lots more. Another big resource, depending on your area, depending on your town, there's a lot of communities around Wyoming and around the nation that celebrate Arbor's Day.
Yeah.
And Arbor Day is a very big celebration. And there's usually a lot of resources in the area.
Mm-hmm.
There's also some really good tree service companies out in the state of Wyoming. And so talking to those, we always recommend through Extension to look for the ISA certified arborist, a company that has that certification. And so that's that professional status and for a tree service person.
Right.
So we'll dive into questions here, Clark. Okay. So the first question is from Mark off of Facebook regarding watering. What's your opinion about using drip irrigation or using watering spikes or perforated pipes to get the water below the immediate surface?
Drip, to me, drip's the best. Again, that way you can put those emitters where they're needed, and you know how much you're putting on. But the one thing with drip systems is you want to, in the springtime, fire them up and walk through those and make sure all your emitters are working, because a lot of our hard waters will plug those emitters. The deep root watering works well, but people tend to kind of just skip around on that. That's why especially if you have a drip system hooked up to a timer, it's getting the same amount each time you're watering. Diligence, going out there with those deeper waters, you can water trees real well with that. And the good thing about that is you're not getting a runoff like you would with some systems. And then what was the other one? The deeper water.
Well, they were just asking about the watering spikes or the perforated pipes to get that water below the immediate surface. What are your thoughts on those? And then they had a follow-up. And would that be advantageous for evergreens 8-inch to 10-inch in diameter?
Yeah, that's why we think of, when people install drip systems, think of down the line. A lot of people put in drip systems, and run 1/2-inch line for everything, which is fine when the tree's small. As the tree gets larger, it's going to require a lot more water. So depending on what your well or your water source is, you can add emitters to a drip system down the line that will to give the tree what it needs. The perforated pipe, it's a big thing now. I've seen is a lot of people doing those rings with perforated pipe around them. And bad thing about that is there's so many emitters, and those emitters plug up early. If you got, when it was installed, if they got any dirt in the lines, whatever, it's a little bit harder to tell that everything's emitting what it's supposed to be emitting. The individual bubblers tend to work a little bit better.
Okay, great.
And plus you can enlarge them emitters as the tree gets bigger to where you don't have to water as long.
Oh, okay. Okay. Our next question is from Lydia. Phil, let me jump ahead on this one. She had a horrible infestation of aphids on a large, older, like 20-year-old cottonwood tree. The branches were just black with them by the end of the fall. Leaf loss too. I am hoping that they got killed during the winter, but do aphids just drop into the soil, and will I have a problem again? And what should I be doing to help my tree?
10 to 1, you're going to have them again next year. There's some treatments for aphids. You know, like I'm not very sure offhand.
Imidacloprid.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Active ingredient is imidacloprid.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in there, Clark.
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
I was trying to help you out.
But and that's something you're probably going to have to treat for a while, because they don't just, you know, one year you got them and the next you don't. Watering's a big thing too. You know, is it a bad area that's getting a ton of water? It's saturated, and but aphids is hard to control. I mean, they're not hard to control. You just have to treat for them.
What is imidacloprid and how is it used?
Do you want to touch that one?
I was just trying to type that into the chat, but so it's a systemic insecticide for use on a variety of trees and shrubs, and it's applied to the soil and watered in, and that plant will take it up, and then it will kill the aphids that are there, and then it will protect the tree from other sap feeding insects.
So any insect that has a piercing, sucking mouth part that will pierce the leaves or stems of the tree and feed on the sap, it ingests the insecticide. And so it's very targeted insecticide application towards those that feed on the tree. So if there's insects in the trees that are not feeding on the sap of the tree, they are not harmed by the insecticide, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I had a request to spell it. I had to write it down. It's IMIDICLOPRID. I think I got that out to everybody. I'll put it in Facebook too.
Right. Perfect. Great question. Thank you, Lydia. Our next question is from Teresa. I have a fertilizer stake that you hook a water hose to and push it into the ground. It has a compartment on the top for fertilizer stakes, which the water slowly dissolves. How deep should this go? I usually move this around the tree over a couple hours, and depending on weather in early spring, it waters very slowly, but unsure of how deep it should be going. Only used on evergreen spruces and pines.
As far as like fertilizers go, you always want to use a slow release fertilizer. A lot of these quick release fertilizers can actually stress a tree more than it's doing good, because it gives a big shot of what it needs and then nothing. The slow release fertilizers, you know, it's slow release. It's given that over a period of time. As far as like how deep she should go, if she get it in a foot, that should be good. Depending on the size of the tree. If it's tree small, you know, it's going to be not need to go as deep. And then slow water again. You want that soaking in, penetrating down. But again, you want whatever you're putting in it, you want to use a slow release. Probably the biggest one that I recommend is the spikes, because that is slow release. You just drill a hole, drop that spike in the ground, and then water it in, and it dissolves over time.
Perfect. Yeah, you don't want to get it too deep, because then you could just be washing that fertilizer below the roots, right? So probably not deeper than a foot.
Right.
You know, probably a nice range would be within that 5 inches to 8 inch kind of range. Yeah. Our next question from Jim. I have several mature Colorado blue spruce and ponderosa pine trees. Is it advisable to spray for Ips beetle in the spring? My trees look healthy and are not showing signs of Ips damage yet, but some of my neighbors' trees have possible Ips damage.
So an Ips is going around a lot of areas right now. The problem with that is catching it in time. If there is Ips activity in this area, I would recommend spraying for it, because it is something that can move down a tree quick. Bad thing with that is it hits right at the top of the spruce. So if you got a big spruce, it's almost impossible unless you have a bucket truck to go up there and look for those exit holes. But what you'll see is just the top starting to die out, you know, thinning first and then brown, and then the needles falling off. But the good thing about it, the Ips beetle is they can't fly as far as like the pine beetle and that stuff. So depending on how close you are to somebody that has it, that would definitely kind of let me know what I'd want to do. And then as far as pine beetle, is that what he's thinking on with pine is Ips?
Yeah, I think that's what.
Could be bark beetle.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It would probably be bark beetles on pine trees.
On pine,
right?
Okay. So spruces would be Ips,
right.
Bark beetle for pines. Okay.
And it'd be the same way with the pines, you know, with the bark beetle, you know, kind of talk to neighbors, see what's in the area, you know, contact these resources we were talking about. If there's an activity in the area, yeah, we recommend spraying, because an Ips doesn't take long to kill a spruce tree, a big mature spruce tree.
Awesome. Our next question is, if you have a tree that is oozing something, who can they contact to look at that to see what the causing of the oozing is and to get help with the tree? It is a deciduous tree that seems healthy otherwise, and they're in the Torrington area.
Torrington. You might contact your conservation district or your extension office, Forest Service. I know Torrington. I'm pretty sure Torrington doesn't have a city forestry, or one of those certified arborists. A lot of times they'll know what's going on or know what's going on in the area. I would contact one of those people and see if you can get somebody to come out and take a look at it. I mean, you can research stuff online too, but once they start doing that, there's a lot of things pop up. It could be a multitude of issues.
It's hard searching the internet. You get a lot of misinformation and direction unless you know specifically what you're looking at or what you're looking for. It's hard, very challenging. But yeah, look into those resources, look into your local area. There's nothing wrong with contacting a private company. A lot of times, at least up in my area in Powell, Wyoming, a lot of our arborists will come in and do a site visit first and give you an idea of what you're looking at and give you a quote of what it would be to treat and that. It may be a small charge or might be a free service. You just have to contact them individually.
Right.
Clark, I don't see any more questions. Did I miss anything, Jeff? Are we good?
I don't think so. There were a couple on Facebook that I think I was able to take care of, but we'll see what happens.
There's one thing I might mention as far as like treatment of trees and that stuff. You always want to timing's utmost importance with that. Too late in the year, you're not going to benefit what you need to benefit. So timing is big, real important on when you do treat using insecticides, that kind of stuff.
Perfect.
Spring would be best, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Awesome.
in the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, we tell people, once the temperatures start getting about 40 degrees and above and stay kind of holding there, is a good time to start spraying. Yeah. And it's not raining constantly, that kind of stuff, because if they treat, especially if they're putting spray on your tree and we get a heavy rainstorm, you're washing a lot of that chemical off.
Yeah. So Clark, just to clarify, when you're applying a product to a tree, it's usually going to be a contact or an ingestion insecticide that the insect has to come in contact with or eat Whereas if you're applying a soil applied product like the imidacloprid product that we were talking about, it's usually put into a liquid slurry, applied to the soil, and then watered in. And so it's two different application types.
Exactly. And this, I actually like the soil treatments. If there is a treatment, you know, for things that soil, you put it in the soil and it takes it up through the tree. Actually, that works a little bit better because that gets to all parts of that plant. A lot of times spray, you know, you miss a lot of areas, especially on spruce trees. They're so thick. If you're trying to treat spruce hips beetle, they need to reach the top of the tree and get that trunk, which a lot of times it's hard to do.
Yeah, if you choose to use pesticides in your trees and you do it yourself, make sure that you read the product labels.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you can hire people to make those applications for you who should be licensed so that they know what they're doing and how to apply them correctly. So
correct.
That's my pesticide applicator educator comment at the end of the day.
You thought you were done with that. Yeah, no, and trees, I guess from my perspective, trees is one of the most challenging plants to administer pesticides to, besides like what you were talking about with the soil application. That's fairly easy just because the size of the trees, you need special equipment to get that pesticide thoroughly covering the tree. Ladders are not always the safest and best idea to try and do this with. And they're just such a big tree. And when you're using a contact insecticide, trying to get good coverage of the tree and of the pests is challenging, but then also timing that spray for when you get the most benefit of that. It's a lot to go wrong, basically. And so you could spend a lot of time, money, and energy and not get much control. So insecticide applications, but pesticide applications to trees is one of the more challenging ones that I see.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. That's all we have, Clark. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for going over a little bit too and helping handle all these Q&A. We really appreciate it. This was a fantastic show. A lot of engagement, a lot of people on. This was a fantastic show. We're really glad to have it. As with all of our shows, we record them, and then after a little bit of editing, we post them back up. So go to the Barnyards and Backyards website. If you want to stop sharing your screen, Clark, I'd appreciate that. Go to the Barnyards and Backyards website. On there is a page for the Barnyards and Backyards live show. And so you will see past shows that are recorded. We try and link up all the references we talked about in the shows at the same spot. So it's a one-stop shop. On top of the Barnyards and Backyards website, we have a button on the side or a drop-down menu on the side that is a treasure trove of information. And in there and specifically is a section just on trees and tree care. So you'll see a lot of resources on tree maintenance and planting and watering and that. Also, Clark mentioned it, reach out to those resources that he mentioned. Your local conservation districts have a lot of useful information and connect you to those resources. We have extension offices. There's an extension office in every county and one on the Wind River Indian Reservation. So reach out to those resources, let them help you. I think the one resource that I can think of that we didn't mention was probably the Wyoming State Forestry Department. And so they are out there in the state and they do a fabulous job and have lots of resources too. So there's a plethora of people that can help you and connect you to the plethora of resources as well. So look into that. The last thing is we do these shows for you as clients and individuals out in the States. We have put in I think Jenny dropped in a link or Jeff did it to an evaluation in Facebook and here on Zoom. So please, if you get a few minutes, please click on that and give us some feedback on the show. This is why we do it. It's for you. And so you can give us guidance on these shows of how well we're doing and what we should be focused on in the future. So with that, again, thank you so much, Clark, for your time.
Thanks
Jeff and Jenny, it's always fantastic work with you guys. And with that, we'll be done for the day. You guys have a great rest of your afternoon and a great weekend.
You too.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody.